We are in the middle of discussing the tefillot that different Amoraim daven for themselves in a private tefillah, which much of them has become already a regular text of tefillah for ourselves. We just had the tefillah of our tefillah of Yom Kippurim, which was said by Rabbi after his tefillah. This was in the if you take a look at the first wide line, Rabbi Batar Surte Amar Hachi Elokai Ad Shelo Notzarti Eni Chadai. Before I was born, I was a nothing. Even now that I am born, and Rava was the most famous, one of at least tremendous people and personalities of Torah in his generation. Halacha is like Rava always. Afarani b'chayai, I'm like dust and dirt in my life. Kavachomer b'mitati, let alone after I die. Harani lefanecha, I am hereby in front of you. Like a vessel filled with shame and embarrassment. It should be well in front of you that I should not sin anymore. And what I have done already that was not right, you should forgive with your tremendous mercy, but not through difficulty and sickness. These are the tefillot that we daven in Yom Kippurim. A beautiful, beautiful words of humility. And we mentioned, perhaps, based on the Gemara, in Masechet Eruvin on page 13, that the Anava of Rava, there the Gemara says, the reason that halacha is like Bet Hillel is not because they were sharper, but Shammai were mechad litfei, they were sharper. The reason halacha is like Bet Hillel is because of the tremendous humility that they had. We find Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the Semen HaTorah, the giver of the Torah, the teacher of the Torah. He was Anav Me'od Mikol Adam Asher Al Pnei Adamai, was the most humble individual. We find it again by David HaMelech, that David was tremendously humble. Anachi Tolat Velo Ish, he says, I'm like a worm, not like a... And yet we say, David HaMelech, Halacha Kemoto Bechol Makom. Halacha is like David, was like David, he was the head of the Bet Midrash. All of that is because of the Midav, Anavav, the humility that the person has, causes him to reside with Shekhinah be with them, and that's what gives really the Chokhmah. He says, Hashem yitel Chokhmah mipiv da'at u'tevuna. Hashem gives the Chokhmah, and from his mouth is da'at u'tevuna. So that is really the last piece that we did in the Gemara yesterday. Now, Mar Bred Ravina, this is the most famous one that has made it to our daily tefillah. He used to say in his private tefillah, when he finished his tefillah, he would say, Amar Hachi, Elokai Netzor L'Shoni Meram. This is Elokai Netzor that we say after every Shemona Esrei with a little bit alteration and change. So Mar Bred, the Ravina would say, Elokai Netzor L'Shoni Meram. Hashem saved my tongue from negativity and my lips from trickster words. People who speak negatively about me, my soul should be calm in front of them. That means not just that I shouldn't answer, but I shouldn't even want to answer. Nafshi tidom, I'm calm, is not responding. Nafshi kafar lekol, my soul should be like dust in front of everyone. That means I should be humble. Petach libi b'toratecha. And again, you see the juxtaposition of Petach Libi B'Toratecha, open my heart to your Torah, is right after the words Nafshi Ka'afar L'chol Tihyeh. Again, that indication of Anava, humility being really the key. U'b'mitzvotecha tidof nafshi, and my soul should be chasing after your mitzvot. That should be my desire in life. V'tatzileni mipnei gara, save me from bad happenings, from incidents, accidents, mi'etzer hara. From Yetzer Hara, Ishara, from a bad woman, from any negativity that is felt and coming to the work. Anyone that thinks bad and wants to do bad against me, Hashem, you should destroy their etzah, their plans, and you should nullify their thoughts. So that is beautiful, beautiful tefillah of Mar Bred Rabina that we say in every tefillah. Yati v'tanita Rav Sheshet, when he would fast, Batar de Metzali, after he would daven, he would say like this. What would he say? Ribon ha'olamim, galui lefanecha bizman shebet hamikdash kayam, Adam chote b'tanit, Adam chote, when the Beit HaMikdash was there, a person would sin, umakriv korban, and he would bring a korban. Ve'en mekarvin mimenu. What do you bring on the mizbeach, on the altar, from the korban that the person brings? You would bring a little bit of the fat, a little bit of the dam, right? You have zrikat dam, and you would have the imurim, a little bit of the fat you would bring on the mizbeach. And that would be the process of atonement for this individual. Now we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. And now, yashafti b'tanit, I fasted. And my fat has been reduced, my blood has been reduced. Hashem should be will in front of you. That my fat and my blood that was reduced, it should be like me bringing that on an altar in front of you. Instead of an animal's fat and blood, I'm bringing my own fat and blood to do tshuva, and that should be accepted like a korban in front of you, al gabei mizbeach, but tirtzeni, and you should have ratzon from it. So that's the tefillah you did that. Beautiful tefillah. Rabbi Yochanan ki ava mesayim safra de'iyov. Whenever Rabbi Yochanan would make a siyum masechet, a siyum sefer Iyov, and he would teach it and finish it, in the siyum he would say the following. Now, Sefer Yov is very somber, Sefer, very difficult and philosophical part of the Tanakh, to the degree that actually the Gemara in Baba Batra has three different opinions, one of which holds that Sefer Yov, the personality of Yov, was never there, was not a real person. It's just a nivu'ah that we have in part of the Navi to teach us deeper lessons of how the world operates. Why do you have righteous people suffer and wicked people prosper? And so it's a very philosophical. After the first few psukim, the first parak, that is beautiful and story. The rest of the 37 chapters are very philosophical, deep, conversations between the debating of the Iyov with his friends and so on. So he would say like this: Sof Adam Lamut. At the end, the person is going to die. V'sof be'emal shchita. At the end of a behemah is to be shechted. Everything is going to disintegrate. Everything that's created, Rabbi Bachai writes in Shara Yichud, that one of the things, everything that's a creature, it's a composition of different particles. And by nature, at some point, it was composed, and at some point, it's going to decompose. That's how it is, right? A creature is like that. So everything, lemitahem omdim, everything is standing to break and decompose. So that's very somber. So what do you want from that? So it says, when you think of this, right? You remember in Daf Hey earlier on, we had Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish said, if your Yetzer Hara is tickling you and he's pushing you, you should go through a whole process, right? If you first you do this, didn't work, you do the next one. Didn't work. What's the last one? Is Korlo Yom HaMitah. Remember that, at some point, you got to go, right? It's not worth it. It's not worth it. You're exchanging an ice cream pleasure of 5 minutes with an unending planning of losing weight afterwards that never is going to happen. So, multiple that by 1,000,000, when you do an Averah, you have pleasure for 5 minutes, and then for eternity, you would have to deal with the consequences of that. So it says, Rabbi Yochanan, when you realize that Olam Hazeh is not really worth it, it's really not worth it. Hakol lemitah. At the end, no one is going to live forever and have pleasures forever. Ashrei mi shegadel b'Torah. Fortunate is the person that uses those limited, finite days of life in Torah, and he's toiling, working hard in Torah, and he does the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Nachat for Hashem, and he grows up with a good name in society, and he passes away from this world with a good name. There's nothing better than that to be left after the person is gone. And on him, Shlomo has said, Tov Shem Mishem and Tov, v'yom hamavet miyom hivaldo. That's the way that the person's day of death is going to be more valuable than the day he's born, when he has Shem Tov. And this was the Divrei Torah that the Yochanan would say in the Siyum of Sefer Iyov, when a person really feels these lessons of a person that was the greatest billionaire of the time, in one day literally lost everything. And lost everything does not just mean his stocks and his money and his houses and his flock, but he lost all his children. It was a tremendous, tremendous hit. And then he gained it back again at the end of the Sefer in a snap of a finger again. So the world goes up, goes down. You realize that the value is Sof Davar Hakol Nishma Et HaElohim Yeravet Mitzvotav Shemor. That's how Rabbi Yochanan would do his Siyum HaSefer Yom. Now that we're done with enumerating and explaining the tefillot, the personal tefillot of the Amoraim, now we're going to discuss some of their pet peeves. Some of the things that Amoraim would always say. Rabbi Meir would always say, learn Torah with all your heart, with all of your nefesh. That means all your power, all of your kochot. You think, I learned 1 hour a day. I'm such a tzaddik, first of all. And also, I'm so exhausted. Are you kidding? Right? And then you get to finals, and you have to have semifinals and real finals, and you're up 18 hours a day, piling and packing in. That's bekol nafshecha. That's the power that the person really has. You gauge it when you really push the limits. It says Rabbi Meir, push your limits. Bechol levavcha. Do it with all your heart. That means nishma, do it for Hashem. Bechol nafshecha. Do it with strength. Ladat et derachai v'lishkot al dalte torati. To know my Torah, to know my path, says Hashem. V'lishkot al dalte torati. To work hard. Lishkot means to wake up early, to be there always. Al dalte torati, and the gateways of my Torah. Netzor torati belibecha. Keep my Torah in your heart, says Hashem. V'neged einecha tiyeh yirati. And yirat shamayim, fear and reverence of Hashem should be in front of your two eyes. Imecha bekol makom, in every place, in every step of life. Okay. Margla b'kumeh de Rabbanan de Yavne. Rabbanan of Yavne. Yavne was the greatest place of Torah at the time. If you remember the Gemara in Gitin, which normally speaking is learned on Tisha B'Av, and of Nun Hey, Nun Vav, the Gemara there says the story of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai sneaking out of Yerushalayim because the Bar Yonim, his nephew, who was the head of the Bar Yonim, and the other ones, they would not let any of the Chachamim go negotiate with the Romans. So they had to pretend he's dead and make it smell bad, and the whole Avinu Malkeinu, that people should not find out that he's really alive, and he snuck out and spoke to the general, to the Roman general, who became afterwards the Caesar, who became the emperor eventually, and he negotiated and he asked for several things. So what do you want? He said, I asked for 3 things, one of which was Yavne v'chachameh. I said, tend the Yavne v'chachameh. Don't destroy Yavne. You come destroy Beit HaMikdash, destroy Beit HaMikdash. But Torah and Chachamim do not destroy. Because without Beit HaMikdash, we could survive. Without Torah Shpal Peh, we cannot survive. That everybody knows. You look at the history. So this is Yavne. All of the Chachamim of the time, Rabbi Bar Yochai, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Eliezer, all of them were there, right? So in Yavne, when someone would leave, when they had like Ben Azmanim, what would they say? This is what they would say. I am a creature, and my friend, the non-Torah learning individual, also is a creature. My job is in town. His job is in the field. I wake up early for my job, and he wakes up early for his job. Just like he has no interest in my job. I don't involve myself in his job either. And maybe you'll think, maybe you'll say, well, you are so special because you are learning 18 hours a day, 16 hours a day, 14 hours a day, and the guy that goes to work only learns 9 hours a day, right? like the Rambam says, the Baal Batim should, right? And or less than that, it goes just to shiur in the morning and shiur in the afternoon. Says the Gemara, this is the point of Rabbanan of Yavne. It's not the amount of hours that you learn. It is what you can do and the kavanah that you have in doing so. Whether you do a lot of hours, whether you do a little, but you're doing what you're possible for you, it's possible for you to do. The direction in life is important. If your kavanah is for shamayim and you're doing what you can, you're equals in that way in the eyes of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. And there's another nugget that's very important in this Gemara, and that is us, the frum Jews, especially Bnei Yeshiva even, they think, okay, I'm learning Torah, Baruch Hashem, the whole day. Beautiful. The Gemara says, no, you have to see this as your job. As your job. You know, if you have a job, you have to be there at 8 o'clock. You're 5 minutes late, you're late, right? You punch in, you punch out, you have to be there on time. You have to work hard. Same thing is with the Torah. The mindset of a person has to be, this is part of my job in life. I have to take it as serious as a person would take serious their job. Abaye would always say like this. A person should be very cunning in Yirat Shamayim. You have to be strategizing in Yirat Shamayim. When you deal with Yetzer Hara is very smart and extremely skilled and very experienced. He has 5,782 plus years of experience, right? So when you deal with him, you got to be very cunning. You have to be strategizing against him, right? In the art of war, of course, you have to know, if you know thy enemy and you know thyself, then you can have multiple battles without ever losing. So knowing thyself is very important. By knowing thy enemies is knowing the Yetzer Hara, and that is equally important. I would say Abaye, the example of this always comes to my mind. The Stipler Gaon Alav Shalom, Reb Chaim Kanievsky's father, he was drafted to the Russian army, and he had to stand post in the cold of winter in Russia. Whoever has been there, this is no jokes, and he couldn't survive standing alive even without a special fur coat. They had specially made designed coats for the guards standing outside for, 4 or 8 hours. I don't remember the details. And one of the posts that he has to stand was Friday night, Shabbat, he had to take over. And, the guy before him just took off the coat and hung it on a tree and left. And he comes, it's already Shabbat, right? So the tree is muktzeh. And anything that's hanging on a tree is muktzeh. So he looks at it, he says, well, I'm going to be here the next 4 hours, 8 hours, I think it was. And there's no way. It's mutar for me to take this. Muktzeh, shmuktzeh. I mean, it's zakat nefashot. It's mutar. I'm going to wear it in 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes. 5 minutes I could do without it, right? 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, I'm going to take it off. Came 5 minutes. I could do another 5 minutes, right? Another 5 minutes. It's not so horrible now. I'm mutar, completely mutar. 5 minutes, I'm going to take it. Okay, at the end of 10 minutes, oh, yeah, not so bad. 5 more minutes. He went through the whole 4 or 8 hours like this. And he once spoke about it. He said, if I would say in the beginning, I would come, I'd say, oh, chas v'shalom, Yetzer Hara would win. But this Arum Be'yirah, you have to strategize. You wake up in the morning, Yetzer Hara says, I'm so tired. There's no way you're going to go through that. So you know what? After Amud Yomi, I'm going to go take a nap, 5 minutes. You see, 99.9% of the time, you don't even need the nap afterwards. You just have to get that first 5 minutes in. So that's what Abaye used to say. Le'olam yeh adam harum be'yirah. You have to be cunning in Yirat Shamayim. Amen. Ma'aneh rach meshiv hema. When you answer softly, you could diffuse chema, anger. Right? Divrei hachamim benachat nishma'im. If you're a wise man, you always speak, very calmly and softly. Rashon Rakah says Shlomo Melech tishpor gared. When you speak soft, you could break bones with it. So he would say it in his own way. Ma'aneh rach meshiv hema. That when you speak softly, like Shlomo Melech says in Mishneh, Yashiv Hema Udvar Esev Ya'ale Af. That's the full pasuk. Umarbe Shalom im Echav ve'im kerovav ve'im kol Adam va'afilu im nochri beshuk. And you should be Marbe Shalom, you have increasing amount of peace with your brothers, with your friends and relatives. In Kol Adam, with everybody. And even with a Gentile, with a stranger in the marketplace. In order for you to be ahuv lemala, beloved up above with Hashem and nechmat lemata, and desired down here in the world. And you should be accepted on briot, on the creatures. Amru alav Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the Nasi. Now we're going to spend a whole lot of time on Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai 10 pages from now. In Daf Kaf Chet, we're going to have almost a half a Amud just speaking about the tremendous midot of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Actually, there's a midrash that says, before the midrash, the Gemara says in Masechet Sukkah Daf Kaf Chet, right? Both of them are, that's the main Gemara that talks about Rabbi Yochanan, that he was a tremendous personality. Hillel HaZaken had 80 Talmidim, and they were categorized in 3 different categories. The greatest of them was Yonatan ben Uziel. The least significant was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? And then the Gemara goes to say tremendous things about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Tremendous things, right? In Masechet Sukkah Daf Kaf. Now, there's a midrash that says one time Hillel HaZaken asked, he said, are all my Talmidim here? Can we start? And they said, yeah, everyone is here. You can start. Just the least significant one. Yochanan ben Zakkai is not here. He said, no, we got to wait because he is going to be my successor. His least significant, he became the Nasi after Hillel. Why is that? Again, you see, the part of his midot, especially when we learn like Gemara in Sukkah Daf Kaf Chet, you'll see why it is. It's not just chokhmah. We just had this also before. There's the humility, the midot, and so on. But you see one little, part of that, the tip of iceberg over here as well. Amru alava Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shlo hiktimo Adam shalom me'olam. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived over 100 years, and in his lifetime, nobody ever beat him in saying shalom. He would always be the first one. Right? Even a Gentile, even a goy in the marketplace that you didn't know. Actually, the Taz asks this question in Yoreda, I think it's Siman Kuf Memchet. There, the Shulchan Aruch says that you're supposed to, because there's a different Gemara, different Chazal that says, when you say shalom, you say shalom aleichem. When somebody says shalom to you, you have to double up on the bracha that you give them. So there the Shulchan Aruch says you should say shalom to the goy first in order to prevent having to give him all this brachot for no reason, because the Gemara in Sanhedrin says it's a isur of lo techonem. That's a can of worms. I don't want to go there right now. But the Taz asks at this Gemara, says, what's the big deal about Rabbi Yochanan saying shalom to them? You're supposed to. Shulchan Aruch says you're supposed to for a different reason. Says the Taz, 2 answers. One of them is so sweet, I have to say it. Says the Taz, because if you know that's a goy that you know. A goy that you know he's going to say shalom to me because he knows Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. But the goy that you don't know, he doesn't know you don't know him, he's not going to say shalom. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, even to those people, he would say shalom. People who would never say even hi to you. You don't know them, they don't know you, you're in a new place, they don't even know what the Rabbi Yochanan is. And yet, he would do this. The Rava would always say, the end purpose of the Torah is tshuva and ma'asim tovim. You want to know what's the pinnacle of Torah when you climb up the hierarchy of Torah is tshuva and ma'asim tovim. A person should not be learning Tanakh, learning Torah, is disrespecting his father, his mother, his Rabbi, and to people who are older than him and more significant than him. As the pasuk says, Shlomo Melech, Rashit Chochma Yirat Hashem. This is from David in Tehillim. Reshit Chochma Yirat Hashem, Sechel Tov Lechol Osehem, Leosehem lo neimar, Ela, Leosim lo neimar, Ela leosehem. The pasuk does not say to those who do, but leosehem, which is an indication that you're doing in Lishma. So Reshit Chochma, the first thing in Chochma is Yirat Hashem. You have to have Yirat Hashem. They say in the name of Khatam Sofer, why is the Gemara always starting from Daf Bet, not Daf Aleph? So Daf Aleph is Reshit Chochma Yirat Hashem. You have to first have an anchor, a platform of Yirat Hashem, then you can learn Torah, and the Torah will actually be effective. If you don't have Torah, if you don't have Yirat Shamayim rather, the Torah is going to be actually Sam HaMavet, as we're going to learn later in the Gemara. Right? The Gemara says in Masechet Sotah Daf Tet that Doeg Adomi was Rosh HaSanhedrin. Doeg Adomi was Avira Roim, they would call him. He was the greatest, mightiest Chacham. That all of his acquaintances, all of his Chachamim in his generation were considered like a grass in front of a tree in comparison to him. And yet he doesn't have Chelek L'Olam Haba, as the Mishnah says in the beginning of the 11th chapter of Masechet Sanhedrin. Is one of those Arba Idiotot that doesn't have Chelek L'Olam Haba with all of his Torah, because the Torah was not based on Yirat Shamayim. So says the Gemara, and anyone that's learning Torah shelo lishma, noach lo shelo nivra. It would have been better for him not to be created. Whoa, right? Now, those who have learned Masechet Pesachim, I see all the eyebrows are going up, right? They say, Rabbi, in Daf Nun Amud Bet, the Gemara there says, Le'olam ilmat adam Torah afilu shelo lishma. A person should always learn Torah, even shelo lishma, shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. Because you start shelo lishma, little by little it becomes lishma. So why do you say someone that learns shelo lishma, it would be better for him not to be created? So Tosafot here asks this question, the last Tosafot on the page, and the Tosafot answers, Ve'im tomar hamar Rabbi Yehuda amar Rav perek makom shna'agu le'olam ya'asok adam b'torah u'b'mitzvot afilu shelo lishma shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. V'yesh lomar, he answers, דהמיירי שאינו לומד אלא לקנטר חבריו, והתמיירי שלומד על מנת שיכבדוהו. Says there are two different levels of shelo lishma. One shelo lishma is you want kavod. The guy wants to get into shidduchim. He starts all of a sudden, morning he's learning, afternoon he's learning. Like, he wants to get a job with someone that goes to shul. He's there giving shiurim. Like, he wants the kavod. He wants the kavod. Kadesh yikraun and Rabbi. Right? So that's a good shelo lishma, because little by little, it comes, see what's amazing. I want this actually. It becomes lishma. But then you have somebody that wants to become a certified Bible critic, right? And he's learning Torah 18 hours a day in order to disprove it, or to come up with the reasons why he shouldn't be keeping this. This is old stuff. It's Rabbanan anyways, right? Not the Oraita, Safek Sfikad Rabban. He wants to find like leniencies and go against the grain of the Orthodox faith. That already is a very negative. Shelo lishma, so that's not good. Okay, and Reb Chaim Volozhiner in his Ruach Chaim, he has other discussions about these beautiful things, not for now. Says the Gemara, Margla Med Rav would always say, Lo ke olam hazeh olam haba. Olam haba is not like olam hazeh. Olam haba ein bo lo achila v'lo shtiya. Olam haba is no drinking, no eating. V'lo priya v'rivya, no priya v'rivya, no marriage concept. V'lo masau matan, no business, not even Bitcoin. V'lo kin'a v'lo sin'a, no jealousy, no hatred, no feelings of competition, tachrut. Ela tzadikim yoshvim v'aterotem v'rashehem. Tzadikim are sitting, their crowns, their maasim tovim was like a crown, crowning their identity there, is with them. V'nehelim miziva shchina. They benefit from ziva shchina, from the closeness to shchina. Shnemar ve'chezu et ha'elokim v'yochlu v'yishtu. As it says, when Hashem was giving the Torah, the Zkenim that went up, they were in vicinity of the presence of Shekhinah, and Vayochlu Vayishtu, and it was as if they were sustained from it, as though they were eating, even though they were not really eating. So says the Gemara. This is actually Rambam's famous thing that he actually mentions, that there's no physicality in Olam Haba, there's no guf, there's no stomach, there's no nothing. of that nature in Olam Haba, which actually, for those who have studied these subjects, is another area of amazing discussion, which we're not going to have, but I'm just going to put it out there, that it becomes seemingly a machloket rishonim, a massive discrepancy within Rambam and Ramban, the Nachmanides, as to whether or not a goof of a person has any identity in Olam Haba. In other words, after Tchiyat HaMetim and after the resurrection and so on, does your goof become a holy thing that is completely attached and nullified to your neshama? But it does exist. And as you work together in this world, doing the mitzvot, the goof also takes a part in the next world, not of course in this way, but in a very spiritual way, or does it bichlal not exist? So Rambam seems to say that at all does not exist. And Ramban and many others, the majority, seem to indicate otherwise. And that is a massive and fascinating talk for itself for a different time. So says the Gemara.
Here, is this the one with not going to be days with the
That's correct. I took sides in how I translated for the purpose of the Gemara here. You're correct. Mr. Abraham is saying that there we encounter the sin of not just Nadav and Abihu and all the people who were there, and they were punished later on, not immediately, but they were punished later on for inappropriately getting close to Hashem. But nevertheless, if you take a look at Rashi there on the pasuk, it tells you Vayochlu Vayishtu does not necessarily mean that they were eating disrespectfully, but it means that they were sustained from the kedusha as if they were having the best shelo kebab ever. Right? That's how it was. And this is the purpose of this Gemara, that you'll have Hana'ah just being in the vicinity of the presence of Shekhinah, even in this world, let alone when the neshama is stripped of all the physicality and it could connect directly with the kedusha. Says the Gemara. Gedola haftacha sheiftichan hakadosh baruch hu lenashim yoter min ha'anashim. It's greater what Hashem has promised the woman than what He has promised the man. This is the piece that you're going to take home today. Nashim, as it says, Shnemar, Nashim sha'ananot kom nashma'ana koli benot botchot ha'azena imrati. The pasuk says, get up, the amazing woman, shma'ana koli, listen to my voice, benot botchot, those daughters that are trustworthy and the trusting, ha'azena imrati. Amar lo Rav to Rabbi Chia said, his uncle, Rav is our famous Rav Shmuel, and Rabbi Chia was his uncle, the Talmid Chaver of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He says, Nashim b'mai zachya. What schut do Nashim have? You say that they're greater, the haftacha is greater to women than men. What is their schut? Nashim b'mai, they don't have the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Right? The Gemara says in Masechet Ketubot, now you're going to get there in a few months, in Daf Kuf Yud Aleph, right? Gemara says there that Amei Haaretz, ignorant people who don't learn Torah, they don't have Tchiyat HaMetim, right? So if you don't have the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, sorry, no Tchiyat HaMetim. So that's the backdrop of this question. Rabbi is saying to Rabbi Chia, wait a second, women also don't have the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So how do they have the schut of Tchiyat HaMetim? It's not talking about what schut they have for Olam Haba. Of course, every mitzvah that you do is a tremendous thing. And women are mechuyavot to do most of the mitzvot. So that's not the question. The question is, what's their schut of Torah? They don't have the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So how do they get that special schut of Tchiyat HaMetim? Says Rabbi Chia to Rav, resurrection of the dead. So says the Gemara, Be'akruye benai, who says you think they don't have part in Talmud Torah? Wrong. Think again. Be'akruye benaihu lebekinishta. They call their little kids and send them to Bet Knesset, send them to Bet Midrash. They do carpool. They take them to school to learn Torah. Ube'atnuye gavraihu berabanan. They send and encourage their husbands to go to the learning Torah, especially if it's early in the morning, going to Amud Yomi. V'natran legavraihu ad de'atu miberabanan, and they wait for their husbands to come back from the Bet Midrash, which Rashi over here says, don't think it's just coming late at night after night seder, they used to go actually to different cities to learn yeshivot after they got married, and they would stay there for years sometimes. You take a look at the Gemara in Masechet Ketubot, again, Daf Samech Bet is coming up, and the Gemara there says the famous story of Rabbi Akiva, who got married with Rachel, the daughter of Kabasvua, and went for 12 years, came back for another 12 years. But there the Gemara brings a number of stories that each one of them got married, went for 12 years. Got married, but the norm seems to be was that they got married and they did 12 years of Kollel. That was the thing. The Chida writes in Marit Ayin, in one of his Sfarim, says why 12 years? This is because the normal life expectancy of a person is Yemesh Notenu Bahem, Shiv'im Shana, 70 years. So you start learning Ben Esther Le Mishnah, so you have 60 years of adulthood, basically, and you're supposed to give Chomesh to Hashem. I give you 20%, right? The mitzvah of tzedakah is 20%. The Vilna Gaon writes in the letter to his wife, he says, anything you give less than 20%, you're going to be ne'enash, you're going to be punished. So the real mitzvah of tzedakah is 20%. Says the Gaon Chida, you give 20% of your life to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, dedicate 12 years out of 60 to learning in Kollel. From when you start your life, you get married, 12 years for Hashem, and then that part you should think before you take it home. But certainly something for us to think about that used to actually do this.
Rabbi, how old were they when they got married?
Young, Shemona Aser Yechupa, they're young, and that's the zchut that the women have, and Bezrat Hashem will continue this to come.